I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando. We've studied over 8,000 successful, high-growth leaders. We distill their practices and perspectives down to lessons that you can apply today. Today, we continue our conversation with John James, the current CEO of Engine.
Yeah, Chip, I want to thank you again for connecting us with John. If our listeners did not listen to the first episode with John, I'd strongly encourage you to do that. You're going to see that he has an incredible story and a journey and a willingness to share the details that oftentimes people won't share in these kind of conditions. We ended the last episode with a bit of a teaser around how a medical diagnosis really changed the way John looks at being a CEO, a husband, a father, and just giving him the perspective he needs to be successful today.
Yeah, John's story has been a very unlikely one and really amazing. From going from a medical doctor to selling barbecue grills online to then selling cowboy boots online. It's been pretty unlikely.
Yeah. As you might imagine, anybody listening, and I know, Chip, you and I sure appreciate this. He has learned a lot in the process. And not only has he learned a lot, but he's got an uncanny willingness to share that very openly and very honestly. Today, our listeners are going to get a real treat from John. It's chock full of tips, tricks, and kind of what we like to say is, wish I would have known that from John's journey.
Yeah, so let's just jump right back into your conversation with John, where he starts to tell you some of the most important lessons that he's learned.
As you meet with, the people that you're investing in or other CEOs or just people that would just like to learn from you, like how do you think about kind of coaching them, talking to them differently after some of the experiences you've had? Some things maybe you wish someone would have kind of told you when you were getting started.
One of the first things that I tell people is don't be afraid of failure, and also don't be afraid of success. Believe it or not, that's an issue for some people. Put it out there. Whatever you're working on, whatever phase it's in, just put it out there. Get some good feedback and then iterate based on the results. So, you take Facebook's move fast and break things. Google's launch fast and iterate. Reid Hoffman, I believe, said, if you're not embarrassed by the beta version of your project, you didn't launch it fast enough. And so those three things, you'd be surprised at how perfection-oriented people are. So aim, fire. No. It's fire, then aim, fire, aim. And that's how you do a startup. And I'm guilty of it here. There are times when we go a little slower than what I'd like. But that's the main piece of advice is just get started, put something out there, show it to real people, get their feedback. And it's a journey. You're going to have a random walk based on what you hear, and you'll eventually build a great business if you do it fast enough.
Yeah, no, I love that. And there's a lot of truth in that. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about a CEO I work with. His name, Blake Garrett. He's CEO of Aceable. He started so many things that just didn't work and just kept iterating and trying, and landed on Aceable, and the business is very successful and growing quite nicely. In fact, he's up for Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year next week. But nonetheless, that was his model. And I've seen that model a lot. So that's fantastic advice. So when you think about being kind of a leader, I always say nothing performs at a 9 or 10 with leaders that are 6 or 7. Well, there's different styles of leaders. There's some leaders that are, very operational. They love the details of the operations and the cadence of that. Some are more, kind of externally focused, could, kind of have the vision and can kind of inspire around those things, and many in between. What kind of leader or CEO how would you describe yourself?
You know what's interesting about that? Fred Wilson, the Union Square Ventures venture capitalist, wrote an article probably 10 years ago. He says, what a CEO does. A CEO does these 3 things and only 3 things. So I read this article, and the 3 things were, number 1, they make sure the company doesn't run out of money. Number 2, they craft the vision and they communicate it with all the stakeholders. And number 3, they recruit, hire, and retain the best talent. And so as I read those 3 things, I just had this sinking feeling like, I'm not a CEO. I'm not a CEO at all. I'm really good at raising capital, evidently. I mean, I've raised over $100 million of capital. So running out of money, I guess I'm good at stopping a company from doing that. I'm pretty good at crafting a vision, and I'm an awful communicator. I can craft a vision and tell it to a small group of folks, and hopefully then it transfers down. Recruiting, man, I'm great at recruiting kind of co-founders and the one or two or three people that sit next to me in my on my management team. Beyond that, I don't think about it. So it's interesting. I have to surround myself with people that help me with two of those three things. And I have a fourth thing that I do. I'm very technically competent in a very narrow field. So where technology meets marketing, I feel like I'm one of the better people on the planet on that. So Chief Growth Hacking Officer is probably a better title for me. But yet I wear the CEO hat. And so that's always been a struggle for me, is I have to have a very strong, competent COO sitting next to me that is able to wear half of a CEO's hat as well. So I'm a little bit different leader than I think most people would channel a normal CEO into. I'm at 50,000 feet and I'm at 0 feet. I don't do anything in between. It's kind of weird.
Well, interestingly, I would tell you you're probably more common than most. I think most people listening are really relating to you as you talk right now. Honestly, because that is very much the truth. It's kind of at 50,000 foot and it's the ground level and not a lot in between. And I think a lot of times, especially with first time CEOs, even sometimes second time CEOs, they just don't crack the code on what do I need to put around me to be a complete CEO. They think I have to be a complete CEO. Well, there's very few people that are the complete CEO. It's that combination of people around them and having the humility to put them around them, trust them, give them, the things that they need to be successful and doing that. So I really appreciate what you just shared. I would say that you're probably more like most, in that way. So that was perfect. So as you think about, like I said, the things that you're passionate about, the things that you're good at and growing, and, really scaling the business, how do you go think about, I always tell people this is oversimplified, but there's really kind of three things. One is you got to figure out your product market fit. Once you figure out your product market fit, then you have to come up with a great strategy that unlocks more of that market. Once you have the strategy in place, then you're just left to execute the strategy. Well, it's the execution oftentimes where, because it's rare that I walk into a place and they say, well, gosh, we don't have a strategy or we don't talk about that. Most of the times I hear, hey, we have a weekly strategy meeting. Yes, we get off site once a year. Yes, we do these things. But as you really kind of get in and start pressure testing and looking at, what's the signal strength on that strategy? What's the understanding? Are the people that are kind of doing the work, do they really have the connective tissue and understand kind of what the intent is behind what we're trying to accomplish as a business, this quarter, this year, whatever. So how do you think about strategy and cascading that down? What are some, and be as specific as you would like on how do you guys go about developing strategy, executing on strategy, and making sure that you guys don't become defocused as you scale?
If you look at those three, I love the way you couch those three phases of the business. So the first is truly that product market fit, and that's launch fast and iterate. That's move fast and break things. That's listen to a bunch of customers and be on this rapid improvement module. I feel like we do a very good job of that. Distribution, same sort of way. Distribution to me is where I always start. I will not do a business or invest in a business or run one of myself unless I already know how to go talk to that target customer. Now, I may not have the right product market fit yet, but I want to know who that end user is and why they would talk to us. And I need to identify very, very well with that person, understand, their motivations and their desires. And so the two of those things, believe it or not, are core and critical. That is, that's where every startup is. Until they start to get some traction, I really don't care about the execution and the third segment of it. But it shifts very quickly as soon as you start to have that initial product market fit, and as soon as you start to have that initial little luck with distribution. My goodness, the whole business has to shift to the right while not losing touch with the first two things. You always want a product that's improving and better and better and better product market fit, and you always want as many customers as you can get flowing through the pipeline. It shifts immediately over to that execution phase where you're really trying to figure out how to make money and how to be operationally excellent and how the 1,000th implementation works just as well as the first. And that's a business. You do those three things, you're done. There's nothing else. So I don't know that I've ever thought about it in terms of those three things the way you put it, but that's exactly what I do, whether it was logical or not.
So do you said you have a COO. How much do you lean on them to really help with that execution piece, and live in that world?
If I had a saddle and could just put it on their back and ride them like a big horse, that's kind of, I've always had the strongest, best COOs next to me. I mean, people that in a traditional business would be the CEO. So if you look at my brother was the president of Sunbeam Outdoor Products, which was the largest manufacturer of barbecue grills. And so he was next to me. He did all the operations. He taught me everything I know about business back in the early days. The second guy that was next to me was Terry Turpin. So Terry was co-founder and COO of an ad agency that ended up selling to the Publicis Group. So they went from 2 people around a kitchen table to 250 folks. So Terry was my second COO, and so much that I learned from him, really around culture and hiring and a bunch of neat things Terry taught me. And then today, Jim Leszewski is our new COO here at Engine. Well, Jim built a marketing automation group out of Dallas that eventually sold to Shutterfly. And he built a $200 million segment of business under Shutterfly, this incredible high-flying Silicon Valley bellwether. And so, man, you look at those 3 guys, of course I was successful. All I do is fritter around and come up with crazy ideas and run as fast as I can. And these guys, Terry said, he said, my main job is to clean up your jet wash. I need you to go. Just go. And so it's pretty neat. I couldn't be me. I have some very weird strengths, I believe. And these guys allow me to indulge myself and have fun and do the things I enjoy that maybe they aren't as good at. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate, and people listening, I know, are appreciating this. A couple things I want to kind of drill a little bit further down on that you said that I think are very, very important. One is that these people allow you to be you, and you have some very different strengths, maybe ones that they don't have. And I think oftentimes there's this concept, especially as you're scaling a business, it's almost subconscious. You just don't hire people that are better than you because you don't want to. Just the risk of doing that, even though I think it's a fool's journey. It's a lie that we tell ourselves. I think some people get caught in that trap. That sounds like that was one of kind of the things that really helped you be successful, is you didn't get intimidated or set back by that, but you very intentionally picked people that you could trust. Obviously, I mean, when you give somebody that kind of access to things, to your life and otherwise, obviously you've got to trust them at a high level so you can be the best version of yourself. I mean, was that something that was just kind of like just second nature to you? You didn't really think about it? Or were you intentional about that, thinking, hey, I'm going to have to hire outside of myself here? Or tell a little bit about that.
Oh, I had to. I mean, you just look at, I love surrounding myself with people smarter than me. And that is the most fun thing about that Engine, is I'm probably the dumbest one in the room at this little company. And that's a lot of fun to me. And here I decided to take that concept that you're talking about to the next level. So when I look at maybe some of my failings as CEO, where the Peter Principle came into effect with me as an individual, how can I grow? How can I do things a little differently at Engine? When you look at what I did there, yes, I was CEO. I was also Chief Growth Officer, so I was logged into Facebook and Google's ad platform every single day. And I was also the product architect. So nothing changed on the website without me doing it. And, I was fairly good at all 3 of those. I felt like I was, a 7 out of 10 on the CEO, a 10 out of 10 on growth marketing, and maybe an 8 out of 10 on maybe 9 out of 10 on the product side. As I look at it in this business, are there people that I could put in the product management role who are better than me? And yeah, is there a 10 out of 10? His name's Blake Purrier. He's a late 20s wonderkind who runs product for us. You look at growth. Well, I'm pretty good at that. I want to have a finger in that. But how can I raise my CEO game up and try to focus on a few less things? So I put someone in charge of growth. I put someone in charge of product. I've got obviously a great chief technical officer I know and trust that I've known for 30 years. So I even upped it one more level here. I get to use my pattern recognition in my 25 years of doing this, but I'm not the chief doing officer anymore. I'm trying to add a little more scale. And so, so far so good. It's a little different for me. There are days I walk home at night and my wife asks me what I did, and I said, I didn't do anything today. But yet I had 50 meetings, but I didn't actually physically do anything. That was a hard transition for me to make, and it was probably the most critical thing I've ever done in my career. Is exactly that.
Yeah, that is the toughest transition, is going from kind of being that entrepreneur to being that executive, where it does feel like you said you didn't do anything, but you're unlocking so many other people to be able to do things and kind of opening up that, the aperture to kind of create more capacity, more velocity. Yeah, so it is an interesting dynamic making that shift. One of the things is that people are listening. So again, remind me, how big is Engine currently?
We have 26 employees between our Fayetteville office, and we have an office in Denver as well, an engineering office.
Yeah, so one of the things that people are listening say, well, sure, at 26 people, and he had a company that he grew to $100 million. No wonder he can have a COO and someone that's head of product and these other things and stuff like that. But tell me a little bit, just, briefly about your thinking around saying, like, why did you bring those people in early? Because a lot of times people will say, well, gosh, is it really time? Should I bring in a CFO? Or gosh, should I bring in a COO? And so what they end up doing is kind of hiring these teams that are maybe 2 or 3 rungs below what they need for their growth and the growth that they're anticipating. And then they end up growing. And then it obviously creates a whole nother set of problems because kind of the foundation got built maybe not the way it otherwise would have or could have. So talk about bringing those people in early and putting them next to you. Why you do that?
I mean, you got to start with the founding team. When I was evaluating investments, the top 3 things I looked at were the founding team, the founding team, and the founding team. And they had to have it all. Like literally, the team that walked in had to be able to operate this business up to $100 million of revenue. I wasn't going to invest. And so I brought in a COO late, but we didn't need a COO in the very beginning. We needed a chief technical officer and a chief product officer and me. To do whatever I do, right, and to raise capital and craft a vision and all that. So our founding team, we had it all except for the revenue side of the business, so the sales and that side of it. So here we are.
Well, you were getting that product market fit initially, as that was the kind of the founding team, right?
Shoot, yeah, we didn't need a COO, and we still don't need a CFO. We need an accountant at this phase.
Yep, and that's interesting because you say you didn't bring in the COO early, but actually 26 people, most people would say that is early.
Yeah, I mean 26 is. Jim wears a lot of hats. So if I tell you about my weaknesses, Jim covers a lot of my weaknesses. He does a lot of COO level things. He does a lot of chief revenue officer things. He's head of sales. So he wears a bunch of hats. So you're not going to find a guy like him growing on many trees.
But they are out there. And I think, once again, the critical point is it's not that pure COO. It's somebody that really can wear a lot of hats and can kind of, maybe as a business grows, he might, slide more where, like you said, like you've had to do, like bring in people that are maybe better at the sales side of things or whatever, but for now able to cover those things. And so once again, I know a lot of people that are scaling their companies. This is a big part of what they're trying to crack the code on is who do I bring in? What do I, allow them to do or what I need them to do? And most importantly, really being honest about what are their strengths and their weaknesses. One of the other questions I had that you brought up is, you have multiple offices. Talk a little bit about how you think about managing, multiple offices. A lot of times people we work with are scaling, and they're scaling geographically. They're also scaling just from the standpoint of a workforce that's working from home and stuff like that. How do you think about, setting strategies, setting, expectations and managing, people that aren't, coming in that front door every day?
Have to have a leader who's part of the management team out on that office. So Brian Sage is a guy that I know and trust. He was our best engineer at my last business. I've worked with Brian for over 10 years as well. And so he was out in Denver and we wanted him on the team. And we also knew that here in Fayetteville, yes, there are a lot of good engineers. I mean, with Walmart and it's the largest company in the world sitting 20 miles from here. So people don't think we have tech talent here, but we do. But there's a different kind of tech talent out in Denver that we wanted access to, senior developers that have been there and done that in a very specific niche that we're looking to fill. So when we hired Brian, it was pretty obvious we were going to build a team around him, and we've got 7 people out there now. It's been the best thing we've done. You just have to over communicate. We have to be. We're on Slack all day, every day. We do video conferences 2 or 3 times a day. They do their morning stand-ups, and then we have our management steering meeting. And you get used to it. It's a cadence that you have to build that doesn't necessarily come naturally. But if you can't do remote work today with a team of developers, boy, you're at a huge disadvantage to people like Engine that can, yes, have a core team in a single place, but be able to have these satellite offices or even single individual developers. We've got the best developer in the world sitting in the Netherlands working for us, and it's the same type of philosophy there, is just over communication.
Yeah, and I like the word choice you had there as far as that cadence. It's like kind of water over a rock. It's maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but how do you keep that communication? I think one of the I don't think I know, after kind of interviewing probably over 10,000 different people, I would say probably one of the top 1 or 2 or 3 things I hear when I go inside of an organization is people say our communications don't work. It's not saying that they don't have enough communications, because oftentimes what happens is people say, well, we need more, What they need is clear communication, and people can obviously operate and do well without certainty, but without clarity, they struggle. And so that cadence that you're talking about becomes so critical. So that's, with that, especially with that mobile workforce. One of the things I want to talk about, and I talked about with almost everybody that comes on the podcast, is the very real issue of just the issues of being a CEO, or even forget the title, just the demands of raising money, growing a business, having a number of people that are relying upon you to make the right decisions, both what you do in your life professionally and personally. And so in that, you hear this comment about work-life balance. We just did a podcast recently that was kind of an accumulation of all the CEOs and others that we've talked to over the years about how they think about it. And one of the common themes is, people kind of throw up on the words work-life balance because they don't believe that that's a real thing. Other people talk about it, you have seasons of life or other things. So, but the concept of work-life balance, everyone kind of tends to understand. I know that, as in your career, you ended up creating with a stress-related illness known as Ramsay Hunt. I don't know if that has to do with work-life balance or not whatsoever, but I'd like to have you kind of talk about, how do you think about both the stress and what you do now to kind of deal with that, and also you've got a family, and how do they get the best part of you?
Gosh, that is the most important question to me at this phase of my career. So if you look at me, I'm this type A personality that has never failed at anything, at least in an early part of my career, and it was just go, hustle, gunner. If you look at a medical school of 150 people, I'd be one of the 15 that you'd look at and go, okay, this guy's a gunner. He's going to make an A on everything. And that bled over into my entrepreneurship career, 100-hour weeks for sure. You hear people talk about it. I actually did it. I mean, it was I lived it. And as I look at a phase in my life, it was right after we had sold the majority of the business to the private equity firm. I was in over my head. I was in Silicon Valley speaking at this investment banking conference with the CEOs of 4 or 5 of the best e-com companies in the world. And I'm a little bit of an imposter up there, but I'm living the life, right? I've $100 million of capital. I'm flying back and forth to Silicon Valley all the time. I'm well respected, and a lot of people are starting to know who I am. And then I get sick, it was on that trip, I was like, gosh, I've got this pain in my ear. I didn't know what it was. And 2 days later, I had this pain in my ear in Silicon Valley. I fly back and we open this flagship store in this 120-year-old building, the most beautiful building in the entire state of Arkansas. And here we have this new store. I fly down for that. And I start throwing up about an hour after this grand opening. And something was wrong. It was like I had the worst flu ever, and I had this ear pain. And come to find out, it was this thing called Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. And so it's a shingles reactivation, but in your brain, basically. And so I lost my voice. I couldn't talk. And in fact, here I am 50 minutes into this. My voice is still a little bit weak. It started to get a little weak on me here. And I couldn't swallow. I couldn't eat solid foods. And so I'm sitting there, and the only reason I got out of bed was to watch the America's Cup. The America's Cup would come on in the middle of the day, and I would get up and I'd go watch that. That was my only 5 minutes out of bed for like 3 weeks. And they canceled it one day with high wind, which is odd. You cancel a sailing competition because the wind was blowing too hard. But I burst into tears. Like I'm sitting on my couch in tears because that was the only thing I was able to do that day. And I was so looking forward to 15 minutes up on my couch. And that's when I wrote my resignation letter. I knew I was done right then. I was not going to fritter my life away on building a business that I was incapable of running. My kids were at the perfect age at that point. They didn't know that Dad had disappeared running this business. And so I literally that day, it was like 6 years ago, I changed my life literally on a dime. And I'm at every volleyball practice for my 2 older girls. My son and I are playing golf together. I'm teaching in the game. We play video. I mean, it's just a completely different me. I hope I'm a better husband. I hope I'm a better father. And I'm probably a darn sure better leader here as well because I'm not stressed out all the time. And so it's very important. And I mean, we could spend a whole hour on my philosophy and thoughts around it. But that's kind of how I got to that phase.
Well, John, thank you for sharing that. I know people that are listening, are really interested to hear, maybe more specifically about, some of the changes that you made and the way you think about things. Maybe think about, if you could go back and give yourself advice prior to, those things, the medical things that started occurring. If you could, what advice would you have given yourself at that time?
It's hard to second guess the way you did it because I think at the right time, at that time of my life, it was the right thing to do and the right thing for the company, the right thing for my career, etc. In hindsight, it's easy. Okay, here I am sick. Well, what caused it? And so I guess if you'd rewind back before that, just the realization that there maybe is a better way. Maybe it's not this full bore 100-hour a week, live it, eat it, breathe it. Maybe there is time, and that time you spend doing hobbies and family and just general relaxation. Maybe that time has a place. Who knows? Maybe things would have turned out different. Maybe we wouldn't have been as successful, but frankly, we wouldn't care. As successful as we would be the right answer rather than as successful as we were. So I'm talking a little bit in circles there, but the way I've kind of adapted that to the next business was to approach it differently. So towards the end of that business with the stress, with everything going on, I turned into a real jerk. I was not a lot of fun to work with. I flew off the handle quite a bit. I was just so passionate that there was only one way to do things, and it was fast, and it was aggressive, and it was right, and no tolerance for mistakes. I think as I look at Engine and the culture we're building here, it's definitely different. It's still hard driving, yes. It's still move fast, yes. But it's not at the expense of other things. We encourage people to spend time with their family. We encourage hobbies. And I live and breathe that. I don't think I've missed a single volleyball game for either of my 2 older girls. And I definitely haven't missed a football game or scrimmage or anything with my younger boy. So I don't know that I would have been in that place 10 years ago, right before I got sick, in order to have that bit of balance in my life.
Yeah, I think it's really good what you said. And I think it just takes a level of either, a crisis or maturity or both to say, like, we would have been as successful as we would have been versus what we were. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in kind of sharing that. I think that, the people that are listening are probably also interested in, just hearing about some of the ways in which you go about, setting up boundaries. Boundaries are for you. Obviously, there's people that like to bust those boundaries, but boundaries are oftentimes for ourselves. What are some things that you've done currently in the new company that you're running?
The crisis itself made me, so I wouldn't get rid of it. It made me who I am today, and it made me think about the concept of boundaries for the first time. And what used to happen, I would walk home and I'd sit and have a very quick dinner with my family, and then I'd disappear again. So I'd spend 30 minutes of family time and then literally just go down to the basement, my office there, and just continue to work until I fell asleep, whether it was midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was. So to me, the boundary is more around time. Sure, things come up after work, and sure, there's emergencies, and sure, you do them. But when I'm home, I try to truly be home. And when I'm at work, I try to truly be at work. And it sounds so simple, but just putting a logical end to the day. I've told my wife, Amy, I say, if I'm not at home by 5:30, you can trust that I'm going to be home by 6, and you can plan dinner at 6 unless I call you and tell you. And that just seems like such a simple thing to implement, but that simple boundary is, it's probably changed my life. The other boundary is I'm not going to miss a kid's sporting event for anything. If they're doing something that's important to them, well, I'm going to be there to watch and support them. And, has it cost me business deals? Well, none that I know of. But at the same time, could it? Well, absolutely. Probably could.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. As far as, obviously it was the health that became the crisis, or at least the exclamation point that caused you to focus. As you stepped back and started thinking about the priorities, because there were always priorities, I'm assuming that they just kind of shifted in their importance. Talk a little bit about just kind of what that journey was like for you and how you thought about that. Like you said, some of the stuff sounds so simple, but at the same time, it's so difficult to implement.
It goes to, what is your legacy? Right? What do you want to be known for 20 years from now, 50 years from now? Is it that you've built a great company and you were an awful dad and an awful friend and an awful husband? No, definitely not. Is it that you want to be this couch potato that sits at home and only does those other 3 things? I'm a great friend, I'm a great husband, and a great father? Well, no, it's not that either. I'm too driven to ever take that. And I think anyone listening to this podcast is likewise driven in that manner. So it has to be both. I have to be the absolute best father I can be, and be the absolute best husband, and hopefully to a few select people, friend. And when you do that, then after you fulfill those needs, I want to be able to be the best businessman I can be. And, what does that mean? At this time in my life, it means I don't get to play a lot of golf. Who cares? I was a scratch golfer. I got to play a ton of golf. I'm terrible now. And that's okay. That's the sacrifice I've made. So, you can have, two of the three things, right? You can have a good family, you can have a good golf game, and you can have a good business. Just pick the two you want. And I've chosen the, business and family route, at least for this time in my life. Who knows what it'll look like 3 or 4 or 5 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to make those choices as life progresses and seasons change. I know that there was a time where, I just would not miss the kids' events, but as they grew older and things like that, there were times where I miss them, but we filled that with other things, and it was okay. I think it was the intentionality of always making that a priority. So as like you said, what does it mean, to be a great businessman? Did you sit down and think about, and maybe it was just a byproduct of what you were doing, think about what it meant to be like, what does it mean to me to be a great father, or to be a great husband, or to be a great friend? And do you kind of have a standard you hold yourself to, or is it just kind of more of a fluid process where you're always kind of checking in with yourself?
If you've got the answer to that, just put it in a book and you'll sell more copies than anything else. I don't have that answer. What I use as my rubric there. So Alex Dillard, the president of Dillard's Department Store, publicly traded retailer, also here in Arkansas, they were an investor in our last business. And when they first invested, Dillard's stock price, I believe, was at $2, just something super low. And as it rose, I asked him, I said, Mr. Dillard, tell me how you architected this great revival or whatever it was. And he said, John, I don't even think about it. All I do every single day is wake up and try to make the best decisions possible. And sometimes it does really well, and sometimes it doesn't. We can't change that. And so I've always kind of relied on that. And he said, look at the Best Buy guys. Same exact philosophy over at Best Buy. An incredibly run company, has survived like a cockroach this retail apocalypse. And those guys do the exact same thing. And so those words from Alex Dillard really resonated to me. Those words were more valuable probably than the investment they made and any of the other business advice they gave. And, it's just this calm, level-headed, I'm the same guy I was at $2 that I am now at $100 of a share price.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I do think, spending so many times, just with friends, coaching folks and stuff like that, I think that oftentimes we tend to, our rubric or our metric is comparing ourselves to others or some kind of standard that we somehow put on ourselves. And I think the simplicity of waking up in the morning, obviously having the priorities, checking in with yourself and saying, what is the legacy that I want to leave. And some days we're gonna do better than other days, to give ourselves some room for imperfection and brokenness. And to your point, that's what makes us, and not try to walk through this door of perfection. As simple as that sounds, overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, I think that sometimes is the very thing that gets people wrapped around the axle. So sharing that story is super powerful. I really appreciate it, John. It's been a absolute pleasure having you on the For You Leaders podcast. Your story, the integrity in which you share it, your transparency and stuff like that, no doubt has helped the listeners. It's helped me. It's helped Chip, and we're deeply grateful for your time. Wow. What a really incredible story. I am so thankful for John and his willingness to share his story so openly and authentically. A couple things I really want you to tune your ear to and take away from today's podcast with John. One is, what can you be learning from your current situation? John was quick to say that he wouldn't change anything because it made him who he is today, and I can really appreciate that. But the key is, learning from the mistakes of the past and having the awareness. So not going into a great deal of shame or guilt or denial, but what can we do? The human mind actually learns by making mistakes. And so what are the things that you're doing today that you can grow from and hopefully share with others so they don't have to make the same mistakes you've made? And that's what I appreciate about John so much, is his willingness to share, so we don't have to learn the same mistakes. We can make our own. The second thing is the easiest way to change is one of two ways. You either have a crisis or you create one. John unfortunately had a real crisis with his health that really caused him to change. I could say it made him change, but I don't think anything can make you change. I think it's a choice. And so if you don't have a real crisis in front of you, what are the things that you can be doing to push your current circumstances to their logical conclusion in a very honest way? Maybe get the help of a friend, somebody that cares deeply about you, that knows your circumstances, that can help you think about pushing those things to their logical conclusion, and see if there is something that you need to be reacting to today. And if you are having a real crisis today, what's the narrative that you're sharing with yourself? What's the story that you're telling yourself and others? Is it real? Is it kinder than necessary, or is it kind enough to help you get through it? I would strongly encourage you not to beat yourself down. A lot of times in the middle of crisis, we go back with a tremendous amount of regrets and things that we wish we would have done differently. And I would encourage you to maybe shift the narrative to saying, how can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? How can I share this with others so that they don't have to make the same mistakes as well? I want to thank John for his time and his willingness to share his story on this For You Leaders podcast. I hope that you have learned as much as I have. I hope that you have at least one takeaway that you can go implement today and learn and grow from. So thank you for listening to the For You Leaders podcast, and have a blessed day.